I am Krishna Mohan Bhatt. Krishna, you can call me. I was very fortunate to have been born in a family of musicians. My father was a sitarist, a wonderful musician. He also taught for many, many years for the University of Rajasthan in Jaipur. He was a music professor as well as a performing artist. And we lived in a joint family system at that time where lots of relatives and my grandparents were also there. And my grandparents learned, they also were kind of semi-professional musicians. They were singers and were very prominent. We are talking about way back, in the time where there was very little cultural, musical activities in this town, and my grandparents did some pioneer work of holding music programs, concerts, inviting people from other parts of the India. So all those things exposed me from the very beginning of my childhood to music and art and all forms of music, and musicians came to my house. I remember that my grandmother was very close to the Dagar brothers, the younger Dagar brothers, Amin Nasiruddin Sahab and the younger two brothers. And so they were frequent visitors. There were other instrumentalists who would come, singers would come. Those were very relaxed time. Well, musician will come. We had a old house in the old city, like a mansion, Haveli, but lots of people lived there. It was like a house that was given to us because my forefathers worked for the Maharaja of Jaipur at some point. So they were scholars, pandits, Sanskrit scholars, Shastris, musicians, artists. So that was the time, and I remember it was very glorious time and very exciting, very colorful and inspiring times for me to grow up in that atmosphere. Instruments fascinated me. Sitar was because my father played the sitar, so naturally it fascinated me. As a child, it happens to everybody that we are very curious. Our attention is not so focused. So I used to, as toys, I used to play with different instruments that were lying around in the house, which included santoor and a little bit of other string instrument, tablas. I was very interested. I think I started when I was about like 6 or 7 years old. I started to play rhythms on tablas, and because in my family everybody played an instrument or sang, the members of the family, they always felt a need that somebody should play in the family tablas. So they were encouraging me to play the tablas, and I played that, and also many tabla players or percussionists who came to play with my father, to practice with my father. They will teach me some music and tal, and so I started to just accompany little tekas or little basic rhythms to the artists who would come and visit in the house, because we didn't have a tabla player, all this. Anyway, but then I think when around the age of 13 and 14, I sort of wanted to express more musically, because there was a lot of music in my head. And I think I was also jealous because my father was teaching all these women, men, and I knew those things already. So I started to play more sitar. And that's how I got really interested. And I also realized that sitar was an instrument that made me express my inner emotions really well, you know, different colors uh, and compositions, and which included poetry and, you know, different compositions that were based on vocal music, which is the basis of our music, you know. As growing up as a young adolescent boy, you know, there were also you felt a lot of feelings and emotions and sentiments, and being an extra sensitive person, you will go through a lot of emotions, or feeling neglected, or I wanted my father to pay more attention to me, but it was all in the house. And then it just inspired me to when he was teaching, he didn't even need to teach me. I will just absorb what I heard and what I listened to, and I would also already know those compositions. So jealousy could be, I was slightly jealous because I wanted to also be part of the whole gang. You know, he was teaching, or women or men and college students. So it's just sort of like the positive part was like inspiration, and also a desire to prove that I have myself, I had lots of talent and I could do it also. So that was the thing. When I was about like 14 years old, Ravi Shankarji came, Pandit Ravi Shankar, who later on I tied with him. He became my guru, and I met him because he came to Jaipur, to our hometown, for a concert. And his presence, and because my father also worked with him, he studied with him. So first time I met him, and as a teenager boy, I was just like so struck. He was like awesome feeling to meet him in person, because when we were growing up, my cousins and we used to play like pretending that we were Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan or Ala Rakha, who played tabla. So we will pretend to be doing a concert. So when I really, they were like very highly esteemed, you know, like almost like, you know, musical gods for us, you know, and music was the focus in our family. So when I first met him, that was a turning point, and I at that time I decided that that's what I want to do my whole life, and preserve this tradition, play the music, and I became very serious, even though I had to go to school and college, and you know, over the years. This was in 50s, I would say, and early 60s. So my first meeting with him was very, very inspiring, and my father encouraged me also then. He said, well, when you get to some extent good, I will send you to him and you can go do your studies further. So, and he looked, I mean, it was very, very exciting to meet him. He was like some kind of like incarnation of musical god or something. So that was a very first impression I had, and it was very, very inspiring. You know, he said. There are many genres of music, singing, and instrumental music is based on singing also. All Indian instruments are designed in such a way that they can imitate the voice very much, and thus often we learn the vocal compositions, and then we try to play them on the instrument if you are an instrumentalist. And many things come from Dhrupad tradition. There is a whole history of Indian music. First, it was in temples. then just like in the West, churches and, then the kings and queens ruled. So much music came out of the temple from the Vedas. That's the roots of our music. And a lot of the chantings and Vedas were chanted, in the temples and things. And often there were accompaniments of instruments or veena, for instance, which is the forefathers of sitar. Mridangam, tabla wasn't there then, but it was all very deeply devotional and you can say spiritual or religious, because most of the songs were in praise of gods and goddesses in India. So in the process, when you learn, there are many different ornamentations we do, which is again offered to the deities that you do, or for this emotional, the moods and emotions and sentiments that we try to express through instruments or singing and poetry and lyrics. So, for instance, when you play an instrument in the style of Dhrupad, you also do all the ornaments in the instrument, which includes gamaka, which is in a form of voice production, and it is it's like an ornament, embellishment, and gamak is there. There's the mead is there. This long connecting raga then came much later, but in the beginning there were padas, like these chants of Vedic chants, or in the service of the gods and goddesses. So there is mead, there is zamzama, there is murkis, and they all relate to. They come, in the singing form from different chakras or body. Some sounds are from the throat, some is from there, some from garbha. So, gamaka is a very strong ornament that we learned because it connects note in a way, that other techniques don't. But then there are other techniques too, So, and it requires, a lot of voice training, and the voice training is similar to training when you play an instrument, which is, you spend a lot of time learning these things. And, in the 13th, as you know, this is an oral tradition. Ours is whether it's folk or classical, and it is very difficult to learn with books, or we don't have any written notation system. So it's been for centuries, it's been transmitted from gurus to shishya, which means teachers to students, and in the family who did it. In India, the traditions are very strong, and you still study in the families, or you go to personal, gurus and, study. So when the music came out of the temples and was patronized by rajas and maharajas in the north, there are a couple of things that also came into existence, which was the Guru Shishya Parampara, the relationship of teacher and student-teacher relationship became very strong because music embodied, family tradition. It became family tradition. And why it became? Because some people achieved mastery and became very popular as singers or instrumentalists. And they were often hired as court musicians. There were famous court musicians in Akbar the Great in 16th century. He had Tansen, one of the jewels, one of the 9 jewels was a great musician, Tansen. who was originally like he wrote many Dhrupad, and every musician in India, performing musician, even now somehow connects to him, to Tansen, in the lineage of Tansen. Of course, so if you then many new styles became popular, and because musicians work in different courts in different parts of India, they also developed particular style of singing or playing an instrument, because in Tansen tradition or the family tradition, uh, over the years, like 16th century, 17th century, he had some children that uh, were singers, but some played the bean or veena, and like Dagar family is one of them, who directly connects to the lineage of bean playing in Tansen's uh, tradition of music, Dhrupad tradition, out of which came later, many forms, new forms were introduced, which was another one was khayal singing. Khayal had influence of the Muslim or Islam, Sufi, very strong Sufi um, thoughts and ideas, and khayal means imagination. So it was a new way of improvisation, and it gave you a lot more freedom to play with the music and the notes or ragas, So it depended on how strong a musician, how much they practiced, what they did, and how each individual musician was, and that's what khayal means. That was introduced, and khayal at one point became still is today. So khayal is the most popular singing style besides Dhrupad. Um, but here's another thing, because of our music being an oral tradition. The Gharana system, which is very strong, Guru Shishya Parampara is there, but sometimes Guru Shishya Parampara is such that it's all about knowledge, and this old deep knowledge that is, the source of Indian music goes back to Vedic times. There was 4 different Vedas, Samved, and it came from the traditions, it came from saints and sages, and the same source as yoga, Ayurveda, music was introduced mainly by this from the Vedas and saints and sages. But then, of course, in the beginning, they were only certain, mostly it was like devotional and say devotional, religious, spiritual, but for dhyan, for meditation and this. But then, as human beings, we have other emotions too. We love people, we miss them too much, and there was this treatises in 13th century that Bharat Muni wrote, and he's prescribed all the different moods, what we'll call rasa. The theory introduced the rasa theory, which included all human emotions expressed through theater, through dance, through music, and abhinay, which is mime and acting, and so all that became very strong part of performances. Dances were introduced, instruments were modified, and then in the north, a lot of strong kings and nawabs and Sufi saints, like Hazrat Nizamuddin, Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, and their disciples, and they had a different way of ecstatic music offered to the gods, and then their spiritual teachers. So there was a very strong part that was that influenced the performance of music, and then besides in the court, musicians will do. So basically, um, two very strong sentiments, Saundarya Shringar, and Saundarya Shringar means romantic and very, what do you call it? Many, there are dominant moods, but then there are many subdivisions, sub moods. Like for instance, when you love somebody, you love, before love comes devotion and admiration. That's a rasa also. So unless you have devotion and respect and love won't happen. Love doesn't just happen. When love happens, then love brings all kinds of, like, there is separation, there is sometimes anger, sometimes admiration, and so all these things became a very strong part of music, and artists try to express this through ragas and talas and ragas. That's when the ragas were prescribed. Each raga has a particular mood, each raga has a particular personality, a characteristic, and time. So music, Indian music, classical tradition is very much related to nature, to like there are morning ragas. In the morning, a person doesn't feel the same way as they do in the evening. So it's little complicated, but it's all part of the art. It's very fine way of expressing through art, these human emotions. Music is like water. It's always flowing and getting richer and deeper, because it never stayed the same. If we say that, it's like, okay, traditions are there, and we take, each generation contributes to something. Those who are serious musicians, they will carry it further. And many things have, of course, changed. First of all, the time sense has changed. People used to have a lot more time to sit and listen, and people also traveled less. They hardly went out of India, and the 40s were different, the 30s were different, the 50s were different. In 60s, people like Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar Khan, Ram Narayan, and instrumentalists, and then people like Abdul Karim Khan, Dagar brothers, and all those singers were there. So they brought out a new wave of thinking musically, or introduced this to general audience, where it came out of the temples and then were performed in auditoriums and things. So technically, and each generation, every decade, made some contribution and adding to the existing traditions that are already there. I think in present day, it's very, very, I think, rich and very refined, very polished. People feel that, you should just talk to the point, not like in old times. Maybe a musician will take 1 hour, to just tune, and people will sit. They didn't have, so, or they would, they developed the voice. Culture was such that there were no sonorization in those times. So often the singers sang in a very high pitch, not the classical ones, but folk tradition, so that 300 people can listen to them. The whole thing was voice culture was very different. But in Drupad tradition or classical tradition, because it was only for a certain class, so the techniques were different, and because it was intimate atmosphere, people listened to. So more like a chamber music style in a smaller audience. This music, the classical tradition was never meant to be like for masses or for like rock and roll type of maybe certain element of that also crept in during the times of Beatles or Yehudi Menuhin and people who fell in love with India or Indian tradition, like Alan Dananlu. In those, he was very very active, and he was genuinely he did some wonderful great work and reached it, made it available to people in the West, in Occidental society, because people didn't know what these, and they didn't understand. So India has had all these different amazing Western historian and art historians and musicians who did a lot of work. So in present day, I think it is such a mainstream. It has become a very mainstream. Everybody knows and has contributed a lot to the world music since from the 40s or 50s even, for over 50 years. There were Beatles, there were jazz musicians, there were classical musicians like Yehudi Menuhin, who was very interested in yoga and Indian philosophy. There were, Alan Danlu, he not only music, but he just did so much work on introducing what yoga is, what dhyan is, what many different forms of art and music, and yes. There are many people whose work is probably not known, or they are not known as people or artists or something, but I came across things. I always, as a student, um, I always looked for works that were clear. So much of I was writing a book. I was working on a book on the contribution of raga sources. How the raga, what is rag? What is a rag? So old definition is there, but what are all the sources that ragas were derived? Ragas derived their names. So ragas are based on nature. The raga names are taken from the nature. Also from composers who gave, like Tansen made these famous rags like Darbari, and his son made Bilas Khani Todi, and then this whole thing is based on a family kind of system. So there are groups of ragas that are like family. There's Malhar group, there is the Kannada group, there is Sarang group, there is the Kalyan group, which is like a family. So when I started to research things, I found that in India, what very little was available in libraries and universities, and what was there, it was very kind of scattered, not really well researched. So when you come across Western scholars, or who did some work in India on ragas or raginis of India's, so then I found that I came across Alan Danalu's work, because he wrote about ragas, and they were really defined in such a way that I related it to more that way, and I was also happy that there were some works available on English and other languages, because a lot of the earlier works were in Sanskrit in India, the old. So, and not everybody knows Sanskrit so well that so translation that way was necessary. So many things, and now it's like so rich that you find. One of the sources of ragas is folk tradition. So when I was working on this folk traditions, which is again related to folklores and stories, and that's how this new folk, a melody becomes very, very like a melody from a particular region will become very popular. Say everybody knows, a song here, or like Christmas melodies or any other melodies. So what classical musicians did, they picked up on those melodies and defined it as a raga form. So there are a lot of ragas or light classical ragas that come from the folk tradition, folk ragas. So that's how the folk ragas were made. So those works were very helpful for me. And then I found out there were very many other scholars who are not maybe not known only in the scholarly world. Music is concerned, personally, I think that music has a purpose to uplift or bring your soul somehow higher than it is, or take you out of the mundane life and gives you some inner joy or spiritual experience that is very healing and uplifting. Um, Although music has gone through lots of evolutions all through the ages, and there was another phase, say like in the 60s, when traditional musicians of India, or even earlier, there were some musicians that traveled 40s and 50s. There were spiritual leaders like Vivekananda and all these, high spiritual teachers were in the West. But sometimes through the ages, through the times, I think, I believe that every music is based on 12 tones of the whole world, whether it's jazz or whether it's classical. There are only 12 tones. And then maybe there's some microtones influences which India has. And we say that the raga, a raga is in between the notes. It's not like on the notes. And that's the beauty of a raga. So often what happens, as human beings, we all have aspects of creative side to us. Even traditional music that we play is improvised, 80%, 90%. So improvised on the structure, there is definitely a strong infrastructure of music, how you improvise within ragas and talas. When in the 50s or 60s, they started to collaborate, with jazz musicians were interested in Indian music. Indian musicians were interested in jazz, and see a dialogue, just communicate. It's a language of the heart. Music is the language of, we share common interests, we share emotions, but the expressions are very different. Every genre of music has a strong canvas behind it. Why they do it? Some have a history of musical traditions that came out of sorrows or suffering of people and became a strong tradition. Maybe some, and it becomes a style, but the background is very different. What we hear today as Indian classical music wasn't there at the time of Tansen or some. It has come a long way, and it's not what we say that, oh, this is Indian music. It's music of today, but very strong tradition that we preserve. So sometimes I think in order to do a piece of art, you need some work. And again, I think it succeeds if people's emotions are triggered. If they feel, there are many types of musicians. Some are highly technician, their technique. But our old teachers used to say there are two kinds of music. One is wow, it's like amazing technique. And some music, you close your eyes and it goes into your heart. And when you go inside, it's like the earth and the sky. And somebody one time, well, there are many stories. Anyway, I won't go into this. But I think the deeper, again, even at the end, it becomes very like, it's just spiritual, and a beauty, inner beauty. It's an endless source of joy. But experimental, I think many musicians were criticized, including Ravi Shankar. When he did that, the traditionalists didn't like it. You know, purity, when we perform, maybe there are influences, but the purity, as long as it's pure and express, it's you know, Indian musicians are able to do that. They can play with other musicians, but when they play classical tradition, so they are very pure, and you know, they can do it. But it's not bad, you know. I think fusion, as they call it, fusion music has been there for years and years, even before people started to travel. When the films came in India, music, for instance, Hindustani film music was the first 30s or 40s when they took elements from different musical traditions, but made it even more sometimes beautiful, because they just try to. It's like how you tell a story and how it affects you, and if you are sincere, and it will have a nice emotional impact.